In tonight's news edition, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announces a ban on Israeli cabinet ministers and lawmakers at Jerusalem's Haram Sharif compound in a bid to ease tensions stoked by Israeli provocations. The Syrian army, backed by Russian airstrikes, extends a major offensive to retake territory held by militant groups in the country's west. And the United States asks NATO allies for flexibility as the alliance reviews its plans to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. We begin with the occupied West Bank, where clashes continued between stone-throwing Palestinians and Israeli troops. Troops launched dawn raids into 3 towns near the city of Hebron and arrested about 24 Palestinians. Meanwhile, tensions remain high in Jerusalem's Haram Sharif mosque compound, housing the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock, where Israeli authorities imposed new bans. This report has more.
In a bid to lower tensions, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced he had banned Israeli cabinet ministers and legislators from visiting the Haram Sharif mosque compound. Palestinians fear provocative visits by Jewish groups and settlers, including ultra-Orthodox lawmakers, to the plaza, are eroding Muslim religious control of Al-Aqsa, Islam's third holiest shrine. After a right-wing outcry, Netanyahu's office clarified that the ban on politicians' visits to Al-Aqsa Mosque would also include Arab parliamentarians. It said in a statement that the move was aimed at cooling things down around the compound. Troops and police stopped Israeli Arab lawmakers Jamal Zahalqa as he was trying to enter the compound in occupied Jerusalem's Old City.
Entering Al-Aqsa for us Palestinians is the normal thing. The presence of the occupation is the abnormal thing. These policemen shouldn't be here and they have no right to be here. Netanyahu gave orders to stop Arab and Jewish Knesset members from entering Al-Aqsa. This equation is unacceptable for us. I will not respect Netanyahu or his decisions. We will enter Al-Aqsa against their will because this place is ours.
Israeli government officials have accused Palestinian leaders of playing on Muslim concerns over Al-Aqsa to incite Palestinians to violence in the absence of peace talks that collapsed in 2013. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has said publicly he wants to avoid armed confrontation with Israel.
We say to the Israeli government, stay away from our Islamic and Christian holy places. Stay away from us. We want peace, and our hands will stay extended for peace despite all that we suffer because of you. Because at the end we are peace seekers, and we tell you if peace happens here, peace will include the whole world.
The Israeli Prime Minister has the authority to order police to hold the visits to Al-Aqsa on security grounds, and his office said the ban was open-ended. In recent weeks, clashes have erupted at the holy site between Palestinian rock throwers and Israeli police. Hala Dababne for the news at 10.
Meanwhile, 4 people, including an Israeli soldier, were stabbed and wounded near a military headquarters in Tel Aviv as a rash of Palestinian attacks in the occupied West Bank spread to Israel's capital. Police said the assailant was shot and killed by another soldier as he fled the scene. The spate of stabbings by lone attackers has alarmed authorities and unsettled Israelis. Jerusalem's mayor urged Israelis to carry their weapons. Israeli leaders vowed to quash the attacks, which were triggered by the killing of at least 5 Palestinians by Israeli forces during clashes across the occupied West Bank. Shortly after the Tel Aviv attack, a Palestinian stabbed and wounded a man in the Jewish settlement of Kiryat Arba in the West Bank city of Hebron. Hours earlier, a Jewish seminary student was wounded in a Palestinian knife attack on a main road in occupied East Jerusalem. Police said the assailant was arrested at the scene. In other news now, the Syrian army began a wide-ranging attack for the second day, backed by Russian airstrikes to retake areas held by the rebel groups. Meanwhile, NATO has renewed assurances to defend allies, including Turkey, in view of the escalation of Russian military activities in Syria. Here's more.
NATO's response to Russia's growing role in Syria was on the table as defense ministers of the alliance met in Brussels to discuss the conflict. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg described Russia's involvement in Syria as a troubling escalation. He said the alliance is ready and able to defend all allies, including Turkey, against any threats. Ankara has complained after Russian aircraft violated its airspace.
We will show once more that we are united in defending our values of democracy, human rights and the rule of law. That we are committed to supporting our partners and that we are ready to defend every ally against every threat.
While the United States has ruled out military cooperation with Russia in Syria, NATO defense ministers also discussed how to encourage Moscow to help resolve the crisis. The meeting came the same day the Syrian military chief of staff said the country's army was launching a major ground offensive supported by Russian airstrikes. The Syrian government, again backed by Russian air power, continued the major offensive for the second day in a row. Troops loyal to President Bashar al-Assad fought heavily battles with rebels for control of a hilltop close to Assad's coastal heartland. Footage released by Russia's defense ministry showed Russia's air force hit 27 Daesh targets, including a number of training sites in the provinces of Homs, Hama, Raqqa and in the northern Aleppo province. The Russian strikes started last week and have mostly focused in areas of western Syria, where Assad has sought to shore up his control after losing swathes of the rest of the country to militants, including Daesh. Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson said coordination between Western countries and the Syrian army, as Moscow is doing, is a necessity in fighting Daesh. She added Russia has no plans to bring in ground forces.
We say that we flew there first at the request of the Syrian government. And what is most important, we coordinate our actions with the Syrian army that resists ISIS on the ground. This is a key point. And we say that the actions of the coalition are not effective because it is not possible to fight ISIS from the air. One can fight ISIS only joining forces with those who fight on the ground. In Syria, it is undoubtedly the Syrian army.
Syrian TV aired what it said were the first pictures of pro-government forces firing and driving tanks during a military operation in Hama and Idlib. A human rights organization said Russian airstrikes have struck medical facilities and civilians in the past 2 days. This man stood amid the rubble, said his home was destroyed by a Russian airstrike, leaving him with nothing. The war, which began more than 4 years ago, has now killed more than 250,000 people, sent millions into exile as refugees, and drawn in armed forces from world and regional powers. Loy Balkar for the news at 10.
Here at home, some 114 Syrian refugees crossed to the kingdom through various crossing points during the past 48 hours. A military source said border guards provided the refugees with the necessary aid before transferring them to refugee camps. The source added that the Jordanian Royal Medical Services medics administers first aid to refugee patients through medical centers set at the frontier. Over to Yemen, where the Yemeni government dismissed as a maneuver the Houthis' acceptance of a UN-sponsored peace plan. The government demanded that the Iran-backed group hand back territory it has seized since last year. The Houthis, who control much of Yemen, along with the party of toppled President Ali Abdullah Saleh, said they had officially informed UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon of their readiness to join talks to end more than 6 months of fighting. Meanwhile, at least 13 people were killed in a rocket attack that hit a wedding party in a village in southwestern Yemen. The Médecins Sans Frontières aid group said it will review its operations in Afghanistan following last weekend's deadly U.S. airstrike on a hospital in the city of Kunduz. At least 22 patients and staff were killed on Saturday's attack by a U.S. aircraft on the hospital, run by the International Aid Group, during fighting between Afghan government troops and Taliban forces. However, the death toll is likely to rise, with 9 patients and 24 staff still unaccounted for. Here's more.
Médecins Sans Frontières will review its operations in Afghanistan after a deadly U.S. airstrike on a hospital last weekend, says General Director Christopher Stokes.
The overwhelmingly shocking nature of the event forces us to take stock of our work in Afghanistan generally and to carefully weigh our commitments to the safety and security of our staff and patients.
At least 22 patients and staff were killed on Saturday when a U.S. aircraft attacked the hospital in Kunduz during fighting between Afghan government troops and Taliban forces. MSF has criticized U.S. and Afghan authorities for taking days to accept responsibility. They say the hospital location was clearly indicated and no Taliban fighters were occupying the site. MSF has been in Afghanistan since 1980, pulling out for a period after 5 staff were killed in 2004. The Kunduz hospital has been shut down since the strike.
So our future ability to work in Afghanistan will now be based on our ability to attain a clear reaffirmation of the respect for humanitarian law.
MSF is now demanding that an international commission investigate the incident they consider a war crime.
Still on Afghanistan, the United States asked NATO allies for flexibility as the alliance reviews its plans to rapidly withdraw troops from the country. U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter said after talks in Brussels that he had asked all of the NATO partners to remain flexible and to consider making adjustments to a 2.5-year plan for the presence in Afghanistan. Meantime, the commander of the U.S. forces in the country again took responsibility for the deadly attack on a Kunduz hospital. Testifying before Congress, the commander of the international forces in Afghanistan, General John Campbell, promised a congressional panel that there will be a thorough investigation.
At their request. But to be clear, the hospital was mistakenly struck, and we would never intentionally target a protected medical facility. I must allow the investigation to take its course, and therefore I'm not at liberty to discuss further specifics at this time. However, I assure you that the investigation will be thorough, objective, and transparent.
European Union governments are seeking to agree on measures to cope with a surge in refugees from war-torn Syria. They were set to agree to step up deportations of illegal migrants among the hundreds of thousands who have failed to win asylum. EU interior ministers meeting in Luxembourg agreed, among other things, to back the detention of those who may escape before expulsion and exert more pressure on African and other poor states. The interior ministers, joined by EU foreign ministers and delegations from Balkan states, Turkey, Jordan and Lebanon, for talks on stemming migrant flows that have plunged the bloc into crisis. Belarusian author Svetlana Alexievich won the Nobel Prize for Literature. She is credited for her portrayal of life in the former Soviet Union, which the Swedish Academy said was a monument to suffering and courage in our time. Alexievich's works includes chronicles of the lives of Soviet women during the Second World War, as well as of the consequences of the 1986 nuclear disaster in Chernobyl and the Russian war in Afghanistan. These are told from the perspective of ordinary citizens. Her publisher in Berlin said he was very moved that the author has won the prize because reading her is one of the most intense and most incredible things you can possibly do.
Svetlana Alexievich is making people's voices heard. It's people whose voices would not have been heard otherwise. And she arranges those voices to a kind of chorus, and this chorus amounts to something like an epic of that empire that doesn't exist anymore, but also of the present there.
Jordan's An-Nashama football national team have cruised past Australia in the 5th round of the 2018 World Cup in Russia and the UAE 2019 Asian Cup joint qualifiers. In an enthralling Group B match held at the Amman International Stadium and attended by His Royal Highness Prince Ali ibn Hussein and other officials, An-Nashama's midfielder Hassan Abdel Fattah opened the lead on the stroke of half-time from the penalty box. All Aussies' attempts to equalise failed throughout the second half, thanks to goalkeeper and man of the match, Amr Shafir. An-Nashama doubled the score in the 84th minute with a superb shot by forward Hamza Dardour. The win leaves Jordan on top of Group B with 10 points.
من جديد عدي زهران كرة عند ياسين عنده المساحة يلا ياسين البخيت ياسين على الجهة اليمنى ياسين البخيت بكل براعة ولكنها مقطوعة مرة ثانية الآن فرصة رجائي عيد يلا يا رجائي يسدد مرة ثانية حمزة الدردور جول يؤكد تفوق الأردني حمزة الدردور يؤكد تفوق الأردني في الدقيقة 84 هدف أردني ثاني عن طريق حمزة الدردور
Well, an impressive performance by An-Nashama earlier today. Now, FIFA's Ethics Committee decided to provisionally suspend FIFA President Sepp Blatter and European Soccer Chief UEFA Michel Platini for 90 days. The suspension also included FIFA Secretary General Jeremy Valcke, who had already been sent on leave. South Korea's former FIFA Vice President Chung Mong-joon was banned from the game for 6 years and was fined $103,000. The moves against the most powerful men in world soccer dramatically deepen the turmoil at FIFA as it faces criminal investigations in Switzerland and the United States into corruption at the highest levels of the game.
It makes sense for everyone. Here we go, Seth. Thank you. Here's Seth, all there, as discussed. Thank you.
Also in sports, world number 1 Novak Djokovic and Fabio Fognini of Italy qualified for the quarter-finals of the China Open. Djokovic beat Chinese wildcard Zi Chang 6-2, 6-1 in just 55 minutes to set up a meeting with American 6th seed John Isner, who beat qualifier John Millman. Fognini upset Belgian 7th seed David Goffin 6-2 to 6-6-2 to set up a clash with Uruguay's Pablo Cuevas. Now, a look at the weather forecast. A bit chilly tonight across much of the hilly areas and the Badia region, but fair elsewhere with a slight chance for light showers in the country's north. Pleasant conditions are forecast for many regions tomorrow, with highs hovering around the mid-20s in the hilly areas. The Jordan Valley and the port city of Aqaba should expect relatively hot weather, with northerly moderate winds and slightly choppy seas in the Red Sea city. Now, look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. Now, to close our top stories once again. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announces a ban on Israeli cabinet ministers and lawmakers at Jerusalem's Haram al-Sharif compound in a bid to ease tensions stoked by Israeli provocations. The Syrian army, backed by Russian airstrikes, extends a major offensive to retake territory held by militant groups in the country's west. And the United States asks NATO allies for flexibility as the alliance reviews its plans to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Raad Lupouj. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good night.